remembrance, suffering, defiance. Those are the words that I, the culture genie, would use to describe al-Arba'in. Arba'iin, which literally means 40 in Arabic, is a Shia Islamic religious pilgrimage and period of remembrance that occurs during a period of 40 days after the day of Ashura, hence the name. The pilgrimage commemorates the martyrdom of Husayn ibn Ali, the grandson of Muhammad the Prophet. It commemorates how Husayn was martyred on the 10th day of the month of Muharram, on the day of Ashura, and for 40 days after, people are to try to travel to Karbala, the place where Husayn was martyred and lies buried. According to the tradition behind the pilgrimage, the first such example of pilgrimage happened when Jabir ibn Abdullah, a companion of Muhammad and a supporter of the line of Ali, and thus Husayn, made the first pilgrimage to the burial site of Husayn as soon as he had heard about the slaughter at Karbala where Husayn was martyred, in defiance against the Umayyad dynasty that was behind the killing of Husayn, as they had forbidden any visitation of the site. And this pilgrimage was made in 40 days from the time of the Battle of Karbala. The reason for the number 40 can be due to religious and cultural significance, outside of just the fact that that was the time it took for Jabir to travel from Medina on the Arabic Peninsula to Karbala in Iraq. But why the number 40? Well, firstly, Arba'iin or 40 days is also the usual length of mourning after the death of a family member or a loved one in many Muslim traditions. So these 40 days of pilgrimage are just a reflection of that period of mourning. Secondly, 40 is generally conceived in Islamic mystical traditions to be a sacred number, and many important events happen in regards to periods of 40. For example, Muhammad was 40 years old when he first received the revelation, the Quran, in the cave given by the Archangel Gabriel or Jibril. And the number 40 is an important number previously in Christian and Judaic traditions as well. For example, 40 being the number of days between the Ascension Day and the resurrection of Jesus. There also exist Christian traditions that say that Lazarus was dead in 40 rather than 4 days before he was resurrected by Jesus. And in the Old Testament, the Hebrew people lived in the lands outside of the Promised Land for 40 years, suffering before they got into the Promised Land. And God made rain fall for 40 days and 40 nights during the flood. And Moses spent 40 days when he went up on the first day of Elul and came down on the 10th day of Tishrei, the first Yom Kippur, with God's atonement. And the same story is also retold in the Quran. There are a lot more examples than these that I could use and discuss, but it's important to notice the pattern of 40 being associated with hardship, oppression, suffering and punishment, waiting and resurrection and remembrance of the dead, which you could argue is almost a sort of resurrection almost. And the Arba'iin pilgrimage is made in order to remember the martyrdom of Husayn and his opposition to evil and his brave sacrifice against the evil represented in Yazid I and the rest of the Umayyads. And as the pilgrimage is made in order to honor this memory, it should come as no surprise that since the first Arba'iin, it has influenced Shia uprisings against at first the Umayyad Caliphate and then the later Abbasid Caliphate, which were two ruling Sunni Islamic dynasties, and also against later rulers. In fact, Arba'iin, ever since its beginning, has been used as a sort of political protest against tyranny ever since it was first made by Jabir in defiance of the Umayyads. And during various periods of history, and even in modern history, it has been an important period of time for protest for Shia Muslims. For example, in Iran, 1978 on Ashura, and a later period of Arba'iin, the protests that would ignite the Iranian revolution started in earnest against the then ruling Shah, the leader of Iran. And the entire event that began during the time of Arba'iin would lead into the current Iranic regime, and they are taking power through the revolution. And the Arba'iin is still used as a period of protest to this day, though often not as extreme as during the Iranic revolution, due to this highly political nature of this period of remembrance and pilgrimage. The Arba'iin performance has been banned in some periods of time. The Umayyads and Abbasids tried several times to ban it, though they didn't succeed in preventing Shias from actually doing the pilgrimage often, as it was too popular for them to manage to stop it. But they tried several times. And later rulers would also try again to stop it, but would also fail. The latest of these attempts was when Saddam Hussein, a Sunni, who ruled as an on paper secular leader, tried to ban it during his regime. And it was forbidden to make the Arba'iin in public, though the pilgrimage still happened despite this, as people sometimes forget that the leaders are not so powerful when 65 to 70% of the population is Shia, like it is in Iraq. Thus, Saddam's attempts at suppressing the practice of Arba'iin were largely a failure due to this. Though following the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the observance of the first free and legal Arba'iin since before the regime of Saddam was broadcast live and with happy celebration. The pilgrimage of Arba'iin is one of the largest and some years actually the biggest pilgrimage of any religion in the entire world in certain years, with 15 to 20 million pilgrims trying to get to Karbala, or at least doing some sort of movement towards Karbala within these 40 days that Arba'iin lasts. Traditionally, the pilgrimage includes walks on foot from Najaf or Basra to Karbala in its longest forms, which means several weeks of walking. However, not everyone will walk on foot, though it is at least expected that you walk on foot the last day of the pilgrimage. In any case, the Arba'iin pilgrimage, in its broadest definition, including everyone that participates even in shorter distances, is actually larger usually than the Hajj. And though, unlike the Hajj, the Arba'iin pilgrimage is non-obligatory, which in certain ways makes it almost more impressive, though there does exist logical reasons as to why the Arba'iin pilgrimage is so much larger. The first has to do with cost, as most Shia Muslims actually live pretty close to Karbala, as the most populous countries with a Shia majority are Azerbaijan, Iran, and Iraq, where pilgrimage takes place. And both Iran and Iraq are pretty populous countries, and it's much closer to get to Karbala than it is to get to Mecca during Hajj for the Shia Muslims than it is for any Muslims, as Saudi Arabia is not very densely populated and it's quite a distance to travel to Mecca, not to mention much more costly, also due to housing of the pilgrims, as there are more larger cities able to support pilgrims coming to Karbala around the city of Karbala than there are in the area around Mecca. Anyway, during the pilgrimage to Karbala, prayers of mourning and remembrance to the glory of Husayn's martyrdom are uttered, especially a prayer known as Ziyarat Ashura. Ashura's visitation, usually recited in front of Husayn's tomb. Also, during the Arba'iin pilgrimage, there are usually stalls or mawakib, processions, as the entire pilgrimage is, in a way, one giant funeral procession in remembrance of Husayn's martyrdom. In any case, these stalls are usually there as places of help to help pilgrims with food or medical aid or housing in tents and the like. This is all voluntary aid given by devout Shia Muslims. And also during Arba'iin, for those that are not directly involved in the pilgrimage, generally you give much more food to the poor during these 40 days. And these stalls usually also work as a type of charity to the local poor and not just to the pilgrims. As the 40 days of Arba'iin is a period of remembrance of pain and suffering, and a period to remember that others are in pain just as Husayn was, and to fight evil just as Husayn did by doing good towards those less fortunate in society. Pilgrims will also wear special clothing during the period of Arba'iin, depending upon which Shia sect they belong to. 12er Shia will wear green, black or white like during Hajj. The Zaydi Shia, which is another sect of Shia, will wear white during Arba'iin. And Ismailis will wear green clothing with red text or red bands, either headbands or armbands, as their standard of clothing during Arba'iin. Though it should be said that many pilgrims do not have special clothing during this pilgrimage and just walk in sturdy clothing generally in order to endure the long walks if they do the entire pilgrimage of walking 40 days, or they just use regular everyday clothing. Many pilgrims also carry flags and banners with them with various Shia slogans and of different colors. But a black flag of mourning for Imam Husayn is by far the most common among 12er Shia, and the green with a red line and text praising Husayn is the most common for Ismailis. In fact, Shia Muslims that are not on the pilgrimage directly will carry flags during the last day of the pilgrimage around in their local community in order to show that they still carry the spirit of the pilgrimage. In any case, the goal of the pilgrimage is to get to Karbala and the grave of Husayn. Of course, not everyone will get to the grave exactly, but it is usually considered enough to get to the city of Karbala by the 40th day to have done a full pilgrimage. And the 40th day is considered a day of celebration because it is an happy ending, because it is the end of mourning and the final confirmation of the greatness of the martyrdom of Husayn in his struggle against evil, the ultimate act of defiance against evil by taking upon the hardship of the pilgrimage. Just as Jabir ibn Abd Allah, the first to do it, did. And remember, Jabir ibn Abd Allah was 77 years old in the 7th century when he walked by foot for 40 days as soon as he had heard about the soon to be happening Battle of Karbala, where Husayn was martyred. Jabir did this despite being warned that he might face consequences if he were to do this, but he did it anyway, in defiance of the threat of the oppression and suppression coming from those that stood behind the killing of Husayn. An heroic defiance in the face of hardship that mirrors the defiance and strength of character of Husayn in his last moments. This is what is celebrated at the end of the pilgrimage. You gotta admit that this is pretty cool, right? We should really give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or special opinions or experiences with this pilgrimage, then please post it in the comment section, as I would love to hear about it. Also, please check out my video about Ashura if you have not done so before. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities. اشترك بالقناة من فضلكم.